Rachel with Rachel Ray's Crime Corner. Hope you're having a wonderful day today. So, I'm back with another story. There's actually two stories in this one, but they are connected, and you'll see how in a little bit. So, the first one I'm going to talk about they've both been solved, but the first one I'm going to talk about has just recently been solved. I'm going to start with the backstory. Today's story is about Karen Neves Snyder. Karen Neves was born in 1948 to Russell and June Pearl Neves. She grew up in Cedar Lake, Indiana, along with her two brothers and three sisters. Paul Snider and Karen Neves met at Lowell High School and they fell in love. The two were married in August of 1965 and resided in Cedar Lake for a year. After giving birth to a sweet baby girl named Paula, they moved to a home in Calumet, Illinois. Karen had not really wanted to move away from her home in Cedar Lake. She had confided this in some friends that she was actually scared in Calumet and wanted to return home. Paul had a job as an electrician with the Indiana Harbor Belt Railroad, where he worked the afternoon shift and got off in the evenings around 11. Karen stayed home to take care of baby Paula. Afternoon of November 22nd, 1966 was the same as any other day. Paul and Karen had lunch together and enjoyed the afternoon. They gave each other a hug as he headed off to work. Karen began to go about the rest of her day, cleaning the kitchen, doing laundry, and feeding the baby. Soon Paul would call to check on her, which was always a highlight of her day. Suddenly, she heard something outside and went to check to see what it was. Her in laws were going to be home this weekend, so maybe it was them. Paul was busy at the railroad, but he couldn't quit thinking about how beautiful his wife had looked as she waved to him from the doorway that afternoon. He was so grateful when his break time came so he could call home. He dialed the number and anticipated the sweet voice that he would hear when she answered the phone. It kept ringing, and no answer came. He called multiple times during his shift, but he never did get an answer. She always answered the phone, but he tried to reassure himself and not worry too much. She was probably just busy with the baby and didn't hear the phone, or perhaps she was tired and resting with baby Paula. On the same day in Cedar Lake, June Pearl Neves, Karen's mom, received a phone call around 4 p.m. She didn't make it to the phone in time. She assumed if it was something important, they'd call back. At age 18, Karen was her second oldest child, so June must have had her hands pretty full with at least four younger children. However, this unanswered call would be something that would haunt her for years. Frank and Elizabeth Snyder, Paul's parents, had been on vacation for a few weeks. While they were away, their son and daughter-in-law had been watching their little boxer, Cindy. They arrived home from Buffalo, New York that Saturday around 8:30 p.m. They lived on the same street as their son, so after they took their luggage into their home, they walked a few doors down to get their dog. Knocking on the door and ringing the doorbell produced no response. Looking through the front window, they could see that the TV was on, along with the bathroom light. They walked around to the back door, but it was locked. They went to the garage, retrieved their boxer, and took her home. Uneasy by the lack of response, they telephoned their other son to inquire if he had heard from Paul or Karen that day. He said he had not. When Paul's shift ended, he rushed home. On arriving, he noticed a couple of peculiar things. Karen always left the porch light on and opened up the blinds before he got home in the evenings. This night, the porch light was not on, and the blinds remained closed. He rushed to the door and, using his key, entered the house. He immediately noticed sweet baby Paula peacefully sleeping in her bassinet in front of the television set in the living room. The TV was on, and the TV guide was nearby and opened up to the Saturday evening programs. He also noticed the bathroom light was on. He felt comfort in the serenity of the sleeping baby and apparent signs of life. This peace would not last long. He approached the lit up bathroom, calling his wife's name, but there was no answer. In the bathroom, he could see blood splatter on the tub, toilet, sink, and floor. Panic began to overtake him. As he approached the hallway stairs, still calling his wife's name, he tried turning on the light, but the light in the hallway wasn't working. He entered the bedroom and began to try to find the dresser lamp. It was gone. But in the dark, he tripped over something. He dashed downstairs and retrieved a flashlight. Returning to the bedroom, he was presented with the most gruesome, heart-wrenching thing he had ever seen. His darling bride lay on the floor, blood splattered everywhere, telling the story of a harrowing struggle. Perhaps as she was fighting to survive, she worried that this monster would try to harm her precious baby after he was done with her. She would have done anything to protect her daughter. Paul ran downstairs and called the police. After his call to the police, the operator called his parents to inform them that they needed to go assist their son. The two arrived at their son's home and could hear him shouting, "Somebody help me! Somebody, please help me!" Mrs. Snider used a flashlight to go upstairs in hopes of rendering aid to her daughter-in-law. Upon entering the bedroom, she was shockingly aware that there was nothing she could do for Karen. She kept her husband Frank from entering the bedroom due to the horrendous scene. She went back outside to be with her son and grandbaby. As you can imagine, Paul was inconsolable. A little while later, the police arrived and began to investigate the grisly crime scene. At first, they believed the victim's wounds had been caused by a shotgun blast due to the excessive damage done to part of her body. Upon further observation, they realized the trauma was caused from multiple stab wounds by a sharp instrument over and over in the same spot. They were aware from the disarray and the amount of blood everywhere in the room, Karen had put up a significant fight against her assailant. The glass top on the dresser had been pulled down, and Karen's body lay on top of the shattered glass. A tan princess phone had been ripped out of the wall and was lying across Karen's body with some of the cord around her ankle. She still had on the same clothing she had been wearing when Paul left for work that afternoon, although now it was in disarray, torn, and soiled by blood. She had reddish gold hair strands in her hand, which matched her own hair. Blood was found on the bedding and the bed itself, which had also been broken. On the floor lay a light bulb covered in blood, and police believed it had been unscrewed from the hallway ceiling fixture. The TV had been knocked over and was lying face down on the floor. There was a 5-pack of Muriel Coronella cigars lying in the baby's upstairs crib at the foot of the young couple's own bed. A Zippo lighter was lying on the victim's forearm. Found this to be a little interesting because cigars used to be a gift given to relax expectant fathers and help pass the time as they paced the waiting room floor. Could it be that the perpetrator wanted to send some sort of strange message? The Chicago Crime Lab was called in to assist the officers in gathering physical evidence and fingerprints. According to Paul, the only two things that were missing were Karen's blue wallet containing $50 and a lamp was missing from the living room. There was evidence that the intruder had attempted entry through different places before getting into the home. A window on the north side of the house was broken. A window in the basement had been broken, and blood was found on the jagged pieces of glass. All of the windows and a door leading to the basement had all been locked from the inside. There was also evidence of attempted forced entry at the back door of the home, along with pry marks on the lock. The front door latch was stained with blood, both on the inside and outside. Detectives felt as though Karen either knew the intruder and opened the door, or she had opened the front door and was overpowered. The open window and pry marks on the door were seen as cover up tactics. There were streaks and drops of blood all over the downstairs area, including the kitchen, living room, and bathroom. They found it strange that there was no blood on the actual rug. There were streaks of blood all along the edge of the rug and on a phone cord lying on the floor. There was a soiled washcloth, two pairs of pants, and a bed sheet found in the bathroom. It was believed the intruder had used these to try to clean himself up. The murder weapon was thought to be an ice pick, screwdriver, or penknife. There was a screwdriver found in the kitchen that was entered into evidence at first, but it was tested and ruled out as the murder weapon. The Snyders' next door neighbors, the Linda Barkers, were questioned about the night of the murder to see if they had heard anything. They had a small black haired dog that would bark with the drop of a hat. The dog had not made a peep on the evening of the murder. Mrs. Linda Barker said if Nikki, her dog, would have barked, she would have checked it out. She said she couldn't hear well and had known nothing of the crime until a reporter called. They then looked outside and saw all the flashing lights. They didn't know Karen. John Linda Barker said he had known Paul since he was just a little fella. Paul's mom said that their boxer Cindy would have barked if she had seen anyone approach the residence, and when she barked, it was heard throughout the entire neighborhood because of how loud her bark was. At first, the police took a hard look at Paul, but he was fairly quickly ruled out as a suspect. They questioned everyone they could find that Karen and Paul were connected to in any way, including acquaintances, friends, and family. They originally narrowed their list down to 6 prime suspects. At Karen's funeral, one of the pallbearers stood out to the police. He had visible wounds on his face and hands. 1 week later, he moved to the top of the list and the others were soon eliminated. James Bobbier had been a longtime friend of the Snyders, and by his own admission, he had been in their home several times. He had explained to the investigators that they would find his fingerprints and blood there because while he had been visiting the Snyders, he had cut himself on one of their windows. Hate it when that happens. There were two types of blood found at the crime scene, type A and type O. Karen's blood type was O. The intruder had type A. Bobbier also had type A. Paul did not have type A or O. Bobbier's wife told officers that her husband had come home on the evening of the crime, acting very nervous. He was disheveled, and she noticed a gash on his forehead along with wounds on his hands. She said he had washed his own clothing and taken a shower before going to Calumet Region Clinic, where he received 7 stitches to close the head wound. He told his wife and later told officers that he had incurred these injuries by tripping over a stump on his way home. The investigators tracked his movements on the night of the crime and found he had been at several local taverns during the hours leading up to the murder. He was initially arrested in connection to the murder of Karen Snider, but there was not enough evidence to take him to trial. In April of 1967, Bobbier's wife reported him missing to the police. She said he had been drinking heavily, causing him to lose his job. He had fled from Calumet along with another resident. The next day, they were involved in a car crash in Hammond, Indiana. Belief was that he had gone to Virginia or West Virginia, leaving his wife and young child behind. Paul and his daughter moved in with his parents after the crime so that they could help him care for baby Paula. Paula grew up in a loving environment, but once she entered school, she said kids would question her about where her mom was. Some would even tease her and laugh at her. Around the age of 11, she asked her father what happened to her mom, and he explained it to her in the best way he knew how. Eventually, Paul met and fell in love with a lady by the name of Connie. Connie loved and adored Paula, raising her as her own daughter. Paul's family always believed James Bobbier was guilty of the murder. Paul continued to try to fight for justice for Karen until the day he died. Paula believes this lack of closure caused her father's early death at the age of only 45. For many years to come, the family continued on with their lives. Paula got married and had children. In 2009, Paula put a call into the Calumet City Police Department, but the detective she spoke with gave her little hope. He stated that the evidence wasn't available. Her father, Paul, had a cousin, and his cousin's wife never could get the brutal murder of Karen out of her mind. When her grandson, Kevin Seeley, would spend time with her, he called her Grandma D. This story of Karen would occasionally come up. He listened to her and learned there had been a primary suspect who was never convicted due to a lack of evidence. Kevin began to wonder if maybe some of the evidence that had been gathered at the time of the murder could now be tested for DNA and perhaps bring about a conviction in the cold case. In December of 2022, he put in a call to Calumet City detectives. 16 months later, the original suspect, James Bobbier, was charged with first-degree murder. His trial began on May 21st, 2024. There is now hope for the family to receive the justice they have waited for nearly 58 years to receive. While researching this story, I found something a little interesting in connection to James Bobbier. This is another story, and this one is actually a little more popular. Um, just listen to it, see if you've heard it before. In 1982, Bobbier was living in St. Louis, Missouri. He had a best friend named Lloyd Allen, and the two worked together at Intertherm Incorporated, where Lloyd worked as a quality control analyst. Lloyd had been living with and caring for his elderly parents until May of 1981, when his mom finally gave up her fight with cancer. While visiting his mom in the hospital, he met a lady there named Shirley Hawkins. She had actually been dating his younger brother. In June of that same year, they began dating. In July, she quit her job at an old folks' home where she had been working as a nurse's assistant. Lloyd was absolutely head over heels in love with Shirley, and he asked her to marry him. In September, the two were married, and James Bobbier was Lloyd's best man. Shirley had 4 children: Renee, Paul Jr., Norma, and Paula. Norma and Paula were still living in the home. Lloyd loved them and treated them like daughters. In February of 1982, Lloyd bought an $11,200 truck, and then he bought an $11,700 Mercury sedan for Shirley. $11,000 in 1982 is equivalent to over $35,000 today. So that would be like spending over $70,000. Shirley insisted that Lloyd purchase disability insurance. He laughed at the idea because he had never missed a day of work. He was certain he didn't need it, but he did it because he loved her and did practically anything she asked. That very same month, Lloyd began to feel ill. Bobbier said Lloyd had always been the nicest guy and would do anything for anyone. But he began to change. He became irritable, and every Monday he would come to work in a stupor, which was very strange because he had never been someone to drink hard liquor. Bobbier said he'd drink a few beers, but never enough to alter his behavior, cause a stupor. He had asked Lloyd what was wrong with him, and he showed Bobbier a bottle of pills. Since he had been feeling so poorly, Shirley had gone to the doctor and gotten him this medicine. There was no label on the bottle, no prescription, nothing. On Thursday, April the 8th, the two told each other goodbye, and Lloyd had told his friend he'd see him on Monday, since they were off work for Good Friday. This was the last time Bobbier would ever see his friend alive. Bobbier tried to contact Lloyd on the phone, but was never able to talk to him. Lloyd was hospitalized on May 6th. And Bobbier still wasn't able to contact him at the hospital because they said no visitors and no phone calls. At one point, he was finally able to get a call through, but he said Lloyd was incoherent and very confused. Because Intertherm was sending sick leave payout to Lloyd, they received a report from his doctor each month. By May 18th, they cited general malaise, but stated he should be able to return to work by the end of June. However, when that time came, Lloyd was referred to a cardiologist. This same pattern continued all the way until October, with reports saying he could return in a month, but he was never actually strong enough to return to work. Lloyd Allen passed away on November 1st, and his death was initially attributed to natural causes. Neighbors said that up until February of that year, they had known Lloyd as a jovial, kind man. When he would get home from work, he often was smoking a cigar and he would smile and wave. One of the neighbors, Dottie Hill, said she began noticing changes as early as spring of that same year. He would stumble around his yard, could barely talk, and had lost a considerable amount of weight. Shirley told some neighbors that her husband had an inoperable brain tumor, while informing others that he was hypoglycemic. Another neighbor said that Shirley had extreme mood swings. Sometimes she would have outbursts, kicking things off the porch and even hitting her children. At other times, she was like a completely different person, pleasant to be around, and talking about how wonderful her husband was. Mrs. Hill said that a week prior to Lloyd's death, Shirley's daughter Norma had asked her to come look at her stepdad. Dottie said he was lying in bed and looked like he was dying. She saw bottles of medicine all around him and asked Norma if she could call an ambulance. Norma said, "He's just drunk. He'll come out of it." After the death, Mrs. Hill called the police and said she suspected foul play. Other neighbors said when the two had first married, Lloyd was the picture of health, but very soon he couldn't even stand up or work. Some of the neighbors said they really believed he had a brain tumor. Norma and Paula testified that they had seen her put a gasoline additive in a glass of warm water, sugar, and orange food coloring, and tell Lloyd it was an iron supplement. They saw her put antifreeze into his beer and wine also. Around 3:30 a.m. on November the 1st, the girls awoke to the sound of their stepdad vomiting. He was spitting up blood. They wanted to call for a doctor, but Shirley objected, saying there were no doctors available at that time in the morning. Lloyd tried to reach for the phone, and she moved it out of his reach, stating the same thing. She then gave him some sleeping pills and cold medicine that the girls later said had antifreeze in it. They all returned to bed until 7:45 when Shirley sent the girls on an errand. When the girls returned home around 8:30, Norma went in to check on Lloyd. She said his lips were blue and his eyes were rolled back in his head. She knew he was no longer alive. Shirley sent the girls out of the house again with no mention of calling a doctor. When they arrived home around 12:15 p.m., Shirley had still not called a doctor. At that time, Norma called 911, but Shirley retrieved the phone and spoke with the operator. When paramedics arrived, she told them that he had passed away just 15 minutes prior. In regard to the antifreeze, Norma said she had only told one friend about it, and she had not been aware it could kill someone until she saw newspaper clippings referring to the danger of it. On November 5th, she decided to tell authorities what she knew. Now I'm going to give you a little backstory to Norma's mom, Shirley. According to Shirley's mom, Shirley was the apple of her father's eye. She would run to greet him every time he came home. She was the oldest of 8 children, so growing up, they never had a lot. They always had what they needed. Shirley had always dreamed of becoming a nurse. She ended up dropping out of high school and working at a restaurant. She met a man named Bill Warren and ran away with him at the age of 17. She returned home a year later, pregnant with her first child, Renee. In the early 1960s, she met Paul Hawkins, The couple had 3 children together: Paul Jr., Norma, and Paula, and they were married in 1968. The couple had a tumultuous relationship, and she filed for divorce, stating that Paul mistreated her. Her daughter Norma said that after Paul left, Shirley became controlling and abusive. She would lock them inside the home, only allowing them to go to school. She kept the telephone locked away where they couldn't use it. One day, after his mom left for work, Paul Jr. tried to run away by escaping out of the window. Shirley caught him and beat him with an extension cord. Norma said she would often beat them with extension cords, and their bruises would always be under their clothes, so no one could see them. Eventually, Norma met a man named Daniel Knoll in the spring of 1977. And Norma was hopeful because her mom had started treating them better. Daniel and Shirley were married, and he made Shirley the beneficiary of a $17,000 life insurance policy from the trucking company where he worked. Around Christmas of that year, David Knoll, Daniel's brother, said that Daniel visited him and he wanted David to sign as beneficiary of the policy, with the understanding it would be used for his 3 children from his first marriage. He had told his brother that his marriage was not doing well, and Shirley had filed for divorce. Soon after that visit, Daniel became very sick. He was despondent, depressed, and incoherent most of the time. As a result of his marital issues, he began to drink quite heavily. In February of 1978, Daniel passed away. After his brother died, David went to Shirley and told her that he would be happy to take care of all the funeral expenses with the insurance money. She became belligerent and threatened to keep the family away from the funeral. When David filed the insurance claim, he was informed that Shirley had already filed a beneficiary card. It was dated 5 weeks prior to Noel's death, but it was postmarked a few days after his death. The dispute went to U.S. District Court, and a handwriting expert testified that the signature on the new beneficiary card had been forged. The federal judge awarded the insurance to David Knoll, who distributed it to his brother's 3 children. After the death of Knoll, Shirley and Paul were married again. Paul said he wanted the marriage to work for the sake of his children. After the couple had been married nearly a year, he said he became violently ill. He remembered one evening drinking coffee. He said it tasted like glycerine and it was very sweet. His head felt like someone took an axe and split it in half, and then he went blind. His wife took him to the hospital where she worked. The doctors said his health issues were related to his heart. About 4 days later, he began to recuperate. Sometime later, he was rushed to the hospital again, this time with internal bleeding. He said those were the only 2 times he had ever suspected his wife of poisoning him. Norma's account of the second time that he went to the hospital, she says that he had eaten some brownies Shirley made. Norma tried to eat one, and Shirley slapped it out of her hand, saying the brownies were not for her. She had made those just for Paul. Afterwards, he became very sick and had to be admitted into the hospital. When he returned home, he began opening all the cabinets looking for something. Norma said she thought it was rat poison. After that second incident, Paul and Shirley were divorced again. And in 1981, Shirley met Lloyd Allen. It wasn't long before he started to feel very ill, but this time the girls were older and witnessed what their mom was doing. She began to be careless and didn't even consider that they saw her putting poison in his medicine and drinks. After Lloyd's death and Norma advising the police of what her mom had been doing, there was an autopsy done on Lloyd's body. The autopsy revealed that Lloyd's body was saturated with ethylene glycol. Symptoms of ethylene glycol poisoning include lethargy, vomiting, abdominal pain, and a comatose state. After Norma's statement to the police, they went to Allen's home and found the antifreeze that had been used. They also discovered that just a couple of months prior to his death, Shirley had taken out a $25,000 life insurance policy on him. Due to the evidence against her, and at the insistence of David Knoll, Daniel's body was exhumed and a detailed toxicology report was done on him. They could find no evidence of poison anywhere in his body. It was determined to be his heart. The report said it was arteriosclerotic heart disease on acute alcoholism. That's very hard to accept knowing what Shirley was capable of. I don't know how she did it, but I really believe she did something to him. In the case of Lloyd Allen, Shirley was tried and convicted. In July of 1984, she was sentenced to life imprisonment without eligibility for probation or parole for 50 years. 14 years later, she died in prison. If you want to know more of Norma's story, there's an episode of Evil Lives Here. It's season 5, episode 11, called Poisoned by Love. Norma tells her entire story, and it's quite interesting. You're supposed to be able to watch it on Max, but I have Max and I wasn't able to find it there. I watched it on Facebook Reels. We see that Shirley had to pay for her crime. Now we just have to wait patiently for Lloyd's friend, James Bobbier, to pay for his brutal crime against Karen Snider. Little did the police know, when they were getting information from Bobbier about Lloyd Allen's help up until the time of meeting and marrying Shirley Hawkins, they were actually talking to a murderer. Prayers for justice for Karen and her family. This man needs to be locked up. He's been free for 57 years. Thank you for taking time to listen. May God bless you and keep you.